you, Mark. Get set. It's time for the Addict II Athlete podcast. Everybody out there, Coach Blu Robinson here. I want to thank you all so much for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. Greatly appreciate you doing so. As always, jump on to addictoathlete.org for all information on Team Addict II Athlete. Hey everybody, I'm excited today to repost a podcast that I was on as a guest just a couple weeks ago, and give a little bit of a shout out to these guys. This is Matt Quackenbush, a young man who I worked with years ago at a treatment center for youth, and he graciously invited me to come be a guest on his show. So I invite you to go listen to the Finding Strength podcast. This is episode 96 on their catalog, but I wanted to just share with you the interview that I had, the great conversation with an old friend, Matt, and his wife, and the great things they're doing. Without further ado, the Finding Hope podcast.
Welcome back to the Finding Strength podcast. Is that good?
Fantastic. Intro, as always, it's very impressive. You know, you come in with the right inflection, the right tone.
Thanks, babe. You're so nice. Anyways, do you want to introduce our guest today?
Yeah. So today, a while back, we had on Brad Waldron. Many people listened to that episode. If you haven't heard it, definitely go check that out. Brad was the recovery, remember?
Yes.
Yeah. Brad's total stud of a human, right? In that episode, he refers to this like legendary figure that is Blu Robinson. And that is exaggerative and facetious, but also sort of kind of true, because Blu is I've known Blu for a long time. We met back in 2008, 2007, somewhere in there, when I was working Telos. And Blu was one of my early kind of like, I don't know, when you're young in the mental health industry, I looked around and I went, okay, who should I learn from? Who are the freaking guys that seem like they got it figured out? Because there's definitely some people they don't know what they're doing, but there's people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then there's these people who are they're freaking badasses and they got it figured out. And so early on, I connected with Blu, and I had a couple of Telos kids that were his clients. And so we collaborated and became friends a while ago. And then since, we've just kind of run in similar circles, crossed paths. He's friends with Desi Lomax. And,
I love Desi.
Went to school together.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So we've had Desi on the podcast before too, him and his wife. A crazy, awesome episode. If you guys haven't heard that one. Anyways, we're just glad to have you here, Blu. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys. It's an honor to be behind the mic on this side. I enjoy it.
Because your Addict Athlete podcast, you're saying, has how many episodes now?
We're just about to 500 now. Yeah.
Wow.
That's a friggin' lot.
That's cool.
It
That's
is
a lot
awesome.
of work.
It is. There's a lot to be done there. But great inspiring stories about people overcoming adversity, turning their mess into their messages. So good stuff.
Mess to the message.
Yeah. I like it.
I stole that from you, and I use it all the time. It's so good.
Yeah, go right ahead.
It's so good. Well, I remember hearing that you say that for the first time, and I was like, that's it. That's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
You got to take this thing that's a total disaster and somehow make meaning out of it.
Yeah.
Mess into the message. And it's awesome. So, the reason why I want to have you on, one, is to hang out with you again for a minute, which is always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
But more than anything, to kind of have you get to be on the interviewee side of the mic and tell your story, man. Because I know bits and pieces of your recovery story. But I think it'd be cool to hear, like, where does it all begin, and how does it happen, and how does Addict Athlete come about?
Story? Yeah, that's what we want to know.
Yeah. So, I guess it's a great lead in.
Where'd you grow up? What's the Blu story?
So it's an interesting one, and it all kind of has foundations into where I am today. And until I started going through the logistics of school, education, and specifically when I was going to the University of Utah to get my SUDC degree. Back then it's called the LSAC, right? Licensed Substance Use Disorder Counselor. I'd never really talked about that aspect of what even intrigued me about that, portion of career being like substance abuse specific, having struggled with my own issues, growing up and not understanding why. I remember it was a class we were doing about family origins, and Beverly Rose, she was an amazing teacher up there. She works at Cirque Lodge for many years. She was my instructor, and we did these things called these genograms, right? And I remember it's like, you know, boxes for males, circles for females, and you set up your whole family tree. And I remember when I got mine done and she wanted us to present, and I went up there to the whiteboard and I sketched it out. And I turned around after I explained it, and everyone was like deer in headlights, like, what kind of family shrub is that, right? That's not a tree. And Beverly said, you know what, Blue? She said, you really should talk about this more. She's like, that is insane that you are here having come from that. And so it all kind of began with my mother, who was 14 years old when she got married. Wow. And I saw a picture of her recently that just blew my mind, because, I mean, she's a child in a wedding dress getting married to this 18-year-old guy and started having kids as a kid. Oh, and so that kind of started a path of chaos and craziness. I mean, you know, when you're that young and you start having children trying to play like an adult and you're not, the kids are the recipient of all that chaos and all that trauma. And she did that for many years. By the time I rolled around, I'm the fourth of 4 kids. I'm the youngest. She'd been married and divorced 5 times, but total, her whole life, it's like 7 times married and divorced. So we lived in a lot of world of poverty, of constantly moving. Before I was 18 years old, we moved 22 times. And so I never really did start a school year and finish in the same district. I was always kind of like moving, bouncing around, which put me at a tremendous disadvantage when it came to education. Yeah. I started, acquiring like a math learning disability and all kinds of crazy stuff that, I never thought would really matter, because my life was pre-planned, destined to be that circle of chaos. I kind of figured, like, this is the way we'll crutch through life. I learned to lie, cheat, and steal from the best, because that's what she had to do to survive. And really, it put us at an incredible disadvantage, because, we just didn't have any roots set. I'm my 2 oldest siblings, my brother Donnie, my sister Christy, came from that first marriage. And then my sister Jennifer came from another marriage. And then she bumped into my dad. They had me. I was born in North Dakota, Grand Forks, North Dakota. And before I think I even turned 6 months old, that relationship she had with my biological dad was so abusive. He was a major alcoholic. He worked as the cook on the Marine base out there. And one day she just scooped us up in the middle of the night and shipped us back here to Utah. And that began a life of poverty and chaos and craziness, which ultimately is going to lead to substance abuse. It's kind of almost a pre-planned, destined path, right?
Yeah.
And so between the low income and the poverty we face and everything we're going through with her, getting into other relationships, one specifically with a man named Paul, who I kind of consider the devil himself. I have scars on my body because of him and how abusive he was. We just learned to kind of stuff everything away. And then at the ripe old age of, I think it was 14, I found that, hey, there's this little substance called alcohol that these guys have around. Started, dabbling in that. And then by the time, 15, 16 came along, it was everything. I mean, it was, come what may. And that lasted quite a long time. Dropped out of high school, kind of figured, that was dumb. No qualms or qualms from my mom. She could really care less. She's like, yeah, choose your own path. Kind of that hippie kind of free spirit mindset of like, have your children kind of graze and raise themselves. But I started noticing in my family system, my brother Donnie, my sister Christy, my sister Jennifer, they started following that same path and pattern that she did. Marriage, divorce, substance abuse, chaos, all kinds of crazy things. And I didn't want that. Like I kind of, being the youngest, I had a little bit of the advantage to look and see the chaos and be like
the layout of the land.
Yeah, it didn't feel right. And so I got real good at hiding and suppressing all my stuff, right? But eventually I got a job working with youth at a treatment center called Heritage Schools in Provo. And I was a courier. My job was to take them to and from airports, doctor visits, court dates, whatever it was. And so I got a lot of alone time with some of these kids. And, we were told, if they ever start telling you about their therapeutic issues, you're a courier, don't say a word. I'm like, okay. But the thing is I started taking them to their 12-step meetings. That was one of my jobs. Every day I was working there I'm talking like 7 days a week. My job was to take them to 12-step meetings. I remember I walked in my very first 12-step meeting. I'm like, this is a hoop. People gather for this. Like, And when I got that job, I really did stop using everything because I'm like, at a moment's notice, I might have to come here. They had this thing called the run team where if the kids ran away, because it was a non-locked facility, had to go out and chase them. And I was really good at catching them. So I'm like, you got paid a whopping $12 an hour when you were like looking for them. And so I thought, well, there's a purpose. These kids are out there. They need, they're running away from their problem. I'm going to help them get back. And so I kind of found this a little bit of a purpose. But every time I take these kids to their 12-step meetings and stuff, they'd talk about their stuff. And I wouldn't say anything about me, but they could, I guess, kind of tell that I cared enough to like, show up for them. And one day, a guy named Steve Allred, he worked at Heritage. He was a substance abuse guy there for the classes that they were having on campus. And he said, Blu, you really do a lot of work with these kids. He's like, they really like you. You ever thought about doing this new program called the Licensed Substance Abuse Counseling Degree? It's at University of Utah. And at that point, he didn't even know anything about me either. I had just barely like graduated adult high school when I bumped into my wife, Marissa, who was a rec therapist at Heritage. Man, I was a brick wall. No one got in, nothing got out. Mm-hmm. And so when I started to kind of let down my guard with her and started telling her like, I don't even have a high school diploma. She's like, well, if we're going to get serious, you need to get some help. You need to get some therapy. Mm-hmm. Because I had built such a wall and again, learned from the best liar of them all, my own mother, that like, I didn't know who I was at all. And some stuff had happened between me and Marissa as we were dating. One of my mentors, his name was Don, kind of called me out one day and was like, Blu, you need help. You're suppressing a lot of this stuff. You're going to hurt yourself. And I was totally intending taking all my secrets, all my substance abuse, everything in my past, right to the grave. But Don's like, you need help. And Marissa's like, we're not going to go any further until you do. So begrudgingly, I went to therapy. And as I was going to therapy, it was funny. I went in and sat down, told this therapist, his name was Arlen. And I wish I could find this guy because there's no way he'd believe where I am today. And I'm like, he's like, I told the whole story from the abuse I suffered from stepdads, all the craziness, everything. And he's like, Blu, I think I know a big part of your problem. He's like, you just don't know who you are. And that pissed me off so bad because I'm like, that's a therapy answer question. No one knows that. It's a rhetorical question. You can't answer it. And I, good day, sir. I left, right? Yeah. Walked out of the session and went back to Marissa as we were dating. And she's like, how'd it go? I'm like, good, I'm done. She's like, you're done? One session? I'm like, yeah, I'm done. And then she's like, what do you mean? So I told him, you asked me who I am. No one can answer that. She said, I can answer that, Blu. And I'm like, oh, really? Who are you? And she did. She started to tell me. It kind of freaked me out because at 21 years old now, she told me who she was, her morals, her values, her beliefs, like everything that made her uniquely her. And I'm like, I don't know that about me. So I had to go back and apologize to Arlen. Like, hey, man, guess I do need some help. So I went to him for a few months. And then I asked Marissa if she'd marry me. And the therapist, Arlen's like, you better bring her in here too. Because he's like, she might need to know what she's getting into. Right. But it was awesome, man. Like, we went to therapy for almost a year together, me and her. And then we got married. And so it was kind of a cool thing for the first time. Like, I felt like I could be genuine and real and whole. And she knew all the good about me and all the bad about me. And she's like, I'm in. Aww. And that was weird to me. I'm like, that is crazy. Because I was ready to keep all that stuff hidden. And that wouldn't have lasted. You can't hold that stuff back.
You can't hold that in. Yeah.
So by the time, he'd asked me about this school, I just barely finished my diploma at high school. I should have been the class of 94. I was the class of 2000.
Heck yeah.
But we got it done,
good
right? We got it done.
10 years later.
We got it done.
Yeah.
And so then I went in and I went into UVU, got a few credits, transferred up to the University of Utah, got my licensed substance abuse disorder counselor. So I was kind of like a professional working in the field. And I thought that was it. And then after I got done with that, Marissa was like, you should keep going. Do the therapy thing. I'm like, there's no way. I'm the first person in my family to ever graduate high school, let alone the person to ever go to college. College was not easy for me. It was rough. I mean, we bumped into a lot of problems, but I made it through. And, by God's grace, it was interesting. When I finally got finished with my master's degree, my mom happened to be in town. She at this time was on marriage number 7, living in New York State. And I'm like, my sister calls me. She's like, Blu, Mom's in town. And so I'm like, huh. So I call her up and I'm like, hey, I want to invite you to this really cool thing that's happening. I'm graduating with my master's degree from college. I'd love for you to be there. It was at the Maverick Center, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, what time? I'm like, well, it starts at 10 a.m. She's like, well, I have a plane that leaves at 4. I'm like, that's totally cool. The E Center, Maverick Center, it's like
That's right
a mile away.
Yeah.
I mean, you could walk there and be there in 20 minutes, right? She's like, okay, yeah, we'll see. Yeah, she never showed up. Never showed up. And so that was a mental like aha moment for me. Like she just never showed up. In fact, soon thereafter, we just got married, Marissa and I get in the mail one day. When we were married, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I get this letter in the mail that says I owe, in 2000, $800 for a cell phone that I never had. And I'm like, what is this? So then it bubbles up, of course. Blue's got a history of being dishonest. Marissa's like, we have this bill for $800. You don't have a cell phone. Are you hiding a cell phone from me? And I'm like, what? And that sucked. So I'm like, no. So I tracked it down, figured out that my mom put my name on her bill and tried to like blame shift it over to me. And when she did that, I called her up. I was done. I'm like, enough of this. Like, this is where I draw the line. So I called her up and I said, why are you doing this? Like, this makes no sense. She's like, I didn't do that. Your sister must have done that to you. I'm like, the guy told me it was you. Your name. This is the day that it happened. And I'm like, fine. So I started letting her have it. And she says, you better be careful how you talk to me or else I'll never speak to you again. I said, be careful because I will honor that. She flipping hung up on me. Wow. So that was even worse now because everything that had happened up to childhood was coming out at this moment. And then she cut me off. I'm like, ooh. So I wrote a letter, right?
Yeah.
I wrote the biggest letter. It was like, I think it was like 8 or 9 pages, front and back. And I just wrote it. So therapeutic now, right?
Yes.
And so I wrote this letter. I folded it up. It took like 3 or 4 stamps to send, I remember. And as soon as I dropped that in the mailbox, I'm like, this is going to change everything.
Wow.
7 years went by, nothing. Never talked to her, nothing. Started having my own family, started creating my own life. 7 years later, I got a card in the mail. It was like a Christmas card. It said, in the spirit of Christ, because she spelled Christ wrong, we should forgive one another. That was the closest of an apology that I ever came to. And more than I thought I'd ever get. But unfortunately, it never really did repair our relationship because I kind of learned something important that like, it's a privilege to have a relationship with us. It's not a right. And so she violates that and puts me at an emotional, like kind of like, like turbulent area. I don't need that. I need you to show up. I need you to be sober for your kids. I need you to be honest with me. And unfortunately, she never really took that as me being serious. And so even when she passed away 2 years ago, I didn't know about it for about a week until I got kind of like the word that she'd passed, which was kind of on brand for her. Yeah. So that kind of sucked. But as I look at my own kids growing up with them, I'm like, how in the world would you choose to like put them in situations with abusive boyfriends and stepdads? And, scars on my body. She knew that this guy, Paul, was beating the tar out of us, but didn't do anything. In fact, I remember when I was probably my daughter, she was turning 21 here soon. She was just a little squirt. My youngest daughter, Savannah, we were going up 7 Peaks water slide in Provo. And I'm standing there, we're waiting in line, and all of a sudden I fell. My daughter Brooklyn touched my back. And she's like, Dad, what's this? And right when she touched it, I knew what she was going to ask. Where did you get this scar? And I had to turn around and explain to her that Superman bleeds. Let me tell you about where I got this. That was the hardest thing ever. But the cool thing was, I'm like, this little stinker is like feeling like, wow, someone hurt my dad. Yeah. And to know that they're never going to feel that. They're never going to experience that. But to let him in and not like scare him away from it and everything. Long story short, brother, like when I met Marissa, her dad and family, they're active runners, swimmers. And Marissa's dad kind of took me under his wing and said, hey, if you're going to marry my daughter, I want you to run a marathon with me. And I'm like, cool. That's all. I'm down. I had no idea what that was. So I go back and tell Marissa, I'm like, Gary gave me the green light to marry you. All I have to do is run a marathon with me. She's like, you dummy, that's 26.2 mile run. I've never ran from anything but police, right? I'm like, that's what? So like, okay.
You're not really built like a runner either.
No, I wasn't, man. Yeah, I wasn't. And so we get in there and I start training with Gary. He's training me for the St. George Marathon. And that was the coolest thing because I got to finally have this father-son relationship. Yeah. And he and I ran together. We trained together. He'd get me up early in the morning. We'd run to play basketball 2 miles away and then run back. I'm like, Gary, can we not just drive there? We're going to run when we get there. He's like, no. And he trained me for this marathon. And I didn't realize it was so therapeutic for me to start running. And that's kind of where I started feeling there's something about movement that works with healing. Yeah. We started doing tons of marathons, got hired on at Telos as I got my degree to do therapy, and started training with the boys. And I started using a lot of what we were doing, working out there as metaphors for their treatment. And when I remember we're going up Sundance in Provo Canyon on the bikes, and I had a kid, Max, and we're pedaling up, and Max is in the biggest gear possible. And I'm like, Max, you got to shift down, dude. Like, you are in your toughest gear. And when he did that, he's like, oh, yeah, it's a lot easier. I'm like, dude, that is just like a phone call we just had with your parents. You're just, I want to get my way. It's my way or no way. I'm like, you're just, in the toughest gear trying to climb that mountain. What if you shifted and been like, I can see where you're coming from. This is what I would have hoped or what I wanted, Mom and Dad, but this is how I see it. And you would have shifted. What would have happened? So I started metaphorically using the analogies of recreation and sports into my own kind of, therapeutic approach. And that's kind of where Addict Athlete was born. In 2011, when I was working at the Utah County Division of Substance Abuse, I caught a few of my clients forging their 12-step sign-off sheets. How dare them, right? I snuck over. I'm like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, oh, crap, busted. And they're like, look, the 12 steps doesn't work for me. And I'm like, I get it. There's more than one path, but we didn't have anything else like that out there. And so I knew that recreation and service and all that kind of stuff worked for my own recovery. And so I, approached my bosses. I'm like, I want to try something. I want to train these guys to do a 5K. I'll have them come a little bit early in the morning. We'll train, we'll run, and then we'll see what happens. And so they gave me the green light, which was crazy because, licensing and all this kind of stuff, dual relationships, all kinds of things where you're a therapist, but you're also their coach. Yeah. But it kind of worked. I got out of my 38 clients, only 5 of them raised their hands to do this. It was 4 guys and 1 girl. And they showed up an hour before group. We'd do a little stretching, we'd run. And as we were running, they'd tell me all kinds of stuff they'd never told me in their office. Yep. And I'm like, why are you, what? You're talking about all this heavy stuff. And I go, I don't know. I just wanted to get it off my chest. I mean, here I'm thinking we're breaking ground on some new therapeutic modality, but it's just EMDR therapy is all it is.
The bilateral.
And so as we're running, they're telling me all this stuff. They line up for this first 5K. We had about 2 months to do Couch to 5K training. It was cool. It's called the Chase the Mayor 5K in Provo. And literally the starting line was right out front of our group door because I worked at the county, which is right there on University Avenue. The starting line for this race was right there. That's awesome. So we'd follow the path, and the day came and all their families came. I'd never really met their families. And so before they started, they gave them one kid made these shirts that said Racing for Recovery, Addict II Athlete. And I thought, if you guys wear those, you're going to break that anonymity thing. Are you cool with that? They're like, yeah, we're fine with that. We're proud of what we're doing. So I'm like, okay. So they all put their shirts on. The gimmick was Mayor John Curtis, Provo mayor at the time, who's now, I think, our congressman. They gave him a 2-minute head start. And the game was to catch the mayor, right? Yeah. Slap him on the butt as you run by. Good job, mayor. Right? And so they did. The mayor took off. 2 minutes later, they all ran. All but one of them caught him. But the coolest thing it was wild. Tyson was one of our first athletes who caught Mayor John Curtis. And he said, hey, Addict Athlete, what is that? So now here's this kid who has a heroin addiction talking to the mayor of a pretty big city in Utah, talking about his recovery. Like the only thing that John was probably thinking, a guy who's a recovering heroin addict's beating me? Like that'd be a little humbling, right? Yeah. And he had that conversation with the 3 other guys that caught him. And they all came down the finish line. I was cheering for him. Everyone was cheering for him. Their families were like, I can't believe you did this. You've been smoking your whole life. How did you accomplish this? And it was awesome. I thought, well, that was a cool experience. But John Curtis called the county commissioners, which were ultimately my bosses there. And so Monday morning, I get called to come upstairs and talk to my boss. And I'm like, oh, crap. Did they really slap the mayor's butt as they ran by? Like, am I in trouble? And I go up there and they're like, this program you started is getting some eyes on it. And I'm like, okay, I guess it's over. And they're like, they really love it. You got to keep it going. So whatever you need, we want you to kind of keep doing it. And that's kind of the green light. Wow. That was in 2011. Now, all these years later, we have thousands of athletes all over the state of Utah. We've got chapters throughout the state. We have, popping up all over the country. We have 2 on Native American lands, one on the Ute tribe and one on the Tohono O'odham tribe in Arizona. And hopefully the Hopi tribe will start implementing this soon. State prison. And it's basically about erasing the addiction and replacing it with recreation, service, team support. And we're not anonymous. We don't hide from it. In 2024, anonymity will kill you. And so we have to share the struggles. And so really it kind of was born through that pathway about really wanting to give back to my community that I took from, and to train people that, you're more than just an addict. That in fact, I don't let my athletes call themselves addicts. They call themselves champions, because an addict is only one attribute to us. I'm an addict, but I'm also a brother and a son and a scholar and a father and a coach, and an artist. So there's so much more to us than just that one negative attribute. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell, brother.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, and that idea of being more than just one specific label is so broadly applicable for everybody. But in the recovery community, that label of addict depends on how you look at it. But a lot of times when you assimilate with that label of addict, it becomes who you are. And the negative associations that come with the word addict are things like junkie, drunk, crackhead, these are the cheat, liar, right? And that's what these people believe they are. And if I'm an addict, then I do those things, and it's really hard for me to not do those things if I'm an addict. So I got to be something else, right?
Absolutely.
And I remember hearing you talk about that for the first time. And it was the first time that anybody had ever publicly said that idea. And I had always thought it. And I talk about this all the time with people. Right? And people, it resonates so loudly with them. Just like, I'm not just this thing. I'm more than that. In fact, I'm not that at all. I can redefine what it means to be, in recovery, an addict in recovery. It can be what's almost like a community or a family of recovering persons, right? Recovering addicts, that's cool. But that's not all that I am. I'm much more than that. But the process of discovering what that looks like for a person does not happen on its own.
You're right.
It needs a group. It needs a family. It needs some sort of connection to something outside of that world of just the addiction thing.
Yeah.
And I think that, my opinion is that's what Addict Athlete capitalized on. Maybe deliberately, maybe accidentally.
A little bit of both. Yeah.
I'm sure. And it's really absolutely incredible to go to races and stuff and see your guys and see the shirts everywhere and just kind of know the birthplace of that whole community, man. I can't believe that it's as big as it is. It's just remarkable.
Well, it is wild.
I think it shows too, because therapy is it's scary to go and sit down with someone and start opening up. And then, if they say something to you, you run out. You're like, I ain't ever going back.
Yep.
But this way, you're running, you're doing something physical. It's not this stuck in this space and stuff like that. So it works for other people. Like you said, they just started talking to you as you're running, and you're like, it's another form of EMDR, which is so awesome. So I think that is a great alternative for people who struggle with sitting in a room across from somebody.
Definitely.
No, it's true. In my office, down in Orem, we have a little gym off to the side, and I have 2 treadmills. One's for me, one's for them.
I love it.
And especially when I get younger kids and stuff, because it's a weird dynamic when you're sitting in an office directly, body language, all that kind of stuff. But when you're walking or whatever, it's a whole different story. They just start talking, and so it's a lot more casual. It's a lot easier to get into. It's kind of a fun thing. I've kind of written to the Shapiro company, said, hey, I'd love for some ideas on how to track some of this stuff. I want to do some research on this because I've seen it work. It's faster. It seems to get entrenched in the mindset a little bit deeper than follow my finger or listen to the sound, because it's something that we just do. And so I think that connection was probably one of the most amazing things. When you do a big relay race with a team, everyone bonds.
Yes.
And even if you're a stranger, when that race starts, by the time it's over, you're lifetime friends.
Yes.
And that same thing happens. And so it does. There's this bizarre connection with movement. I've kind of understood that movement equals healing. We can't just stay put. We have to move. And when I first started, I caught a lot of flack for that. I caught a lot of flack for the way that we approach things, because
there were like not just detractors, but people who are opposed to this method.
Oh,
like
yeah.
thinking it was unethical?
Well, they're stuck in like a 12-step, like a OG 12-step model. I don't know how to describe it, right?
Yeah.
100%.
Like your old timer 12-steppers are really entrenched in the almost the lore of 12-step.
Yeah.
Like
And it's not even really like the law of 12-step. That's kind of the way that I look at it. Like you go, I mean, I've read the Blue Book, I don't know how many times, and you look at the intention behind what is happening in the big Blue Book, right? The book for Alcoholics Anonymous. And you look at how that kind of gets twisted, maybe even borderline bastardized in some of these cultures, and it becomes this lore.
It does.
And it lingers, and they have a really hard time with anybody who says there's an alternative. There's only one way to do this, and if you don't do it this way, you'll never get sober.
And I never liked that. I never liked that because
A lot of people don't.
You didn't like that either. I remember.
No.
yeah, when I was going to all those 12-step meetings with those kids, I went for about 3 years just straight. And I remember towards the end, there was this guy that came in and he was talking about how his recovery was so important to him that tonight he needed to come to this meeting instead of being at his son's like 12th birthday. Yeah. And I'm sitting there thinking, you're an idiot.
Yeah,
you're missing every point to this because you know there's a kid somewhere in this town that's missing his dad.
Yeah.
And you're here talking to us. We don't care about you. Go be a dad. That's why you're sober in the first place. And I started hearing that, and you're right, this weird kind of subset. And I love the 12 steps. I think they're fantastic.
Me too. They're a prescription for life. Everyone should read the 12 steps and live by those things. They're incredible. Yes.
Treatment centers and whatnot have buggered them down because the traditional 12 steps, you were supposed to be done within a month. Because the faster you got to step 12, where you started to be able to serve, that's where the real healing was maintained. But we started figuring out that there's 12 months in a year, there's 12 steps. So if we can prolong these, in fact, most treatment centers will only get you to step 4, which is the hardest thing. That's when you're going to start being open and start being vulnerable and like talking about your stuff. And then they're like, okay, well, we'll see you later. That's why most people don't get past step 4. Okay. It becomes a barrier. And so and I'm sorry, I know that people don't like me for saying this, but you know me.
Well, I always admired you.
If your treatment center is based on the 12 steps, how dare you? Because it was never supposed to be brought in that way. It is a free resource to people that needed it. And so when you bring it in as your philosophy, you're taking money away from people that could get it from a sponsor and a very good home program. So I'm not a fan of programs that utilize that. I think they could utilize it as an arm, but not as their foundation.
Not a leg.
That's why
not both legs.
No, that's why with Addict II Athlete we created something completely different. We're not a 12-step group. In fact, it's kind of funny. We have just as many people that do not have addictions at all, that have a loved one that does, that come to our meeting, and that was kind of mind blowing because I'm like, why are you guys here? Well, because they're on the same team as someone that struggles, and we got to know how to work with this. So the people that do have addictions, the people that don't, they cohabitate in our meetings, and no one's the wiser because we don't talk about the negative effects or war story. We talk about the success of what happens when you turn your mess into your message, when you can erase and replace. And even right down to our name, Addict II Athlete uses the Roman numeral 2 because the Romans don't identify 0. So you're never less than 1. And so even at your darkest time, you're still here. There's power in that. When you add something to it, when you add the next number, that next column, that becomes the basis of foundation to build on. You put 2 columns together, you can build on that. And so we kind of talk a lot of, I guess, variation of like, you're not powerless. You're stronger than you think you are. You know, there are problems and stuff you've got to face, but that resistance that you've had can bring strength. Resistance training, right? It's you got to push heavy things. And guess what happens? You'll get stronger. And so a lot of that metaphoric change happens when people start realizing that, I'm more than just an addict. I'm an athlete. I'm a champion. But then there's so many other attributes. You know this. Your I am statement is the most powerful thing you can say. And if you use it negatively, that's what you'll get.
Yep.
Well, and the way you see yourself, if I see myself, that I am statement becomes what aligns my nervous system with subconscious action.
Yeah.
And so if I believe that I am this thing that has all these negative connotations, my nervous system is going to behave in accordance with that belief. I mean, and changing that is as simple as changing what you do. And you have to do things differently to change how you see yourself. You can't change how you see yourself before you start doing things differently.
Yeah.
And you have to act, you have to behave, you have to create something with your action so that you can really begin to understand the truth about who you are. Because this narrative or story that I am, you know, just this thing, powerless or worthless or unlovable or some variation of not enough, right?
Yeah.
If that is my driving force behind my behavior, that is going to show up in a bunch of really unhealthy ways, and it's going to bleed out and affect all these people around me. And there's so many different ways that I could compensate for that negative belief, but the reality is the only way that I can change that belief is by doing something. And that will help me understand the truth about me, that I'm more than
100%.
just enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actively engaged in life again, moving yourself from point A to point B. I mean, it's that growth factor. That's the funniest thing. Most people come in. We use running as kind of the core sport in Addict Athlete because it sucks. Right?
Yes,
It's hard.
Yeah,
It's not
so
fun.
hard.
Some people that fall in love with it, I'm like, you guys are nuts. Like, you know, it's just crazy. But we do that because it's hard. And training for some kind of event is boring. There's no one there cheering for you. You don't get the medals. You don't get the T-shirt. You know, and it's awesome when I started realizing, I started seeing some of these metaphors that these guys were using in life. Like, if they want to do good when it counts, they've got to do good when no one's watching. So what kind of person are you when no one's watching? And I could tell real quick, like, oh, you're not training, because like all of a sudden they take off at the line, but 100 yards into it, they're starting to walk. I'm
Puffing
like,
and puffing, yeah.
You're not doing your training, are you? And that opens up to all kinds of stuff. Tell me about why you're throttling back. Like, what's going on? So there's a lot of cool little metaphors and stuff that happen in that development of change, of just like in real time. I knew what my athletes were doing Friday night because Saturday morning they had a race. And so it gave them a different purpose. It gave them a different motivation. And I caught a lot of flack for this too. They're like, you're just helping them learn how to cross addict. And I'm thinking, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Yeah. Would you rather have your husband, your son, whoever, getting up at 5 a.m. to go run, or not coming home until 5 o'clock because they've been on a run, right? Drug bender. But with Addict II Athlete, we also really push heavy service, and so you have to balance yourself. Service and aid stations, community, speaking, all kinds of stuff, and then we have our meetings that we have. We have our team support. We have an athlete that just lost her mom a day or two ago, and the team rallies around to bring them food. And so it becomes this kind of like family, this team in and of itself. And once you're part of that team, you're never not a part of it, even if you stop coming because life gets in the way. I mean, I had a client years ago that was on the team, and he came to me one day and he's like, my son wants to play football, but I don't have money to pay for it. I've got court fines. I've got all this stuff, my job, all these things. And I'm like, dude, how much is it? I had no idea it was upwards of like $800 to get a kid on a high school football team. And so if he doesn't pay that, the kid gets to be the kid on the bleachers, and that kid on the bleachers is going to be under the bleachers eventually, right? And so with our nonprofit, I'm like, look, I'll sponsor him. Let's get him sponsored. Your job then is to be the first one at the games and the last one to leave. You get to bring all the Gatorade, and you get to be the loudest cheer section. And so he did. And we lost him because he started being a dad. But he still pops in every once in a while because he, has since way been graduated. But I thought that's what it's about. So even though people come and they go, and we've got some, I mean, even those first 5 athletes, I know where every one of them are. That's crazy.
That is
cool.
Our retention is insane. Like I've got athletes that have been on this team since day one that I've watched their kids grow up. I've watched their kids grow up and become law enforcement officers and all kinds of other things, nurses and all kinds of things. I'm like, this is wild, because it's not just a recovery program. It's a process of life. It's a team. Yeah,
I've always loved that the language that you use too was very, whether deliberate or accidental or some combination of both, probably, that you use the language of coach, team, champion, just changing the narrative around what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this thing, this language that's just very familiar, that reminds you maybe of high school sports or something that's very familiar to you, that's not 12-steppy, that's not addicty, that's not recovery based. And it's this really erase and replace, which I just think that is
really good. Yeah.
It's really simple.
It is very simple.
It's really simple. And I can see why people would give you crap or whatever, however you refer to it, for cross addiction. Because that's a conversation. I'm actually curious your thoughts on that idea of cross addiction and what.
Now tell me
what is cross addiction? Go for it.
What is cross addiction?
So cross addiction is just like if you were to erase your addiction but replace it with an addiction, right? So it'd be like, let's say you're an alcoholic, so you stop drinking, but you pick up nicotine smoking, right?
Okay.
So you're cross addicting. Or sometimes people get cross addicted when they've stopped using like amphetamines and whatnot, and they start cross addicting with food.
Okay.
And so it becomes a compulsion and a behavior. And I think that when we start looking at that, yes, there can be issues with too much working out, too many hours in the gym and whatnot.
And that's with anything, though.
Well, it's with anything.
But the word that you use that's important, he said compulsion.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the key factor.
Of replacing that.
And it can happen. And the cool thing about it is we watch it real close because the way our program's set up with programs, coach, assistant coach, and personal trainers. And personal trainers are a lot like we train those to be like the sponsors would be. And so you've got a lot of support, but then the most amazing thing happens when they start realizing, because they're going to exhibit, behaviors that mimic addiction. But when we can say you're doing too much, you're going to injure yourself, and then you're going to be, hurting because you want to, do this marathon or this ultra run. What are we doing here? And so in real time, you can start throttling them back and say, you need more service. We need to get you out there. I don't need you I don't need you in the game today. I need you on the bench. But the whole concept of serving, and that's not just like an aid station. That's like, hey, we got a new teammate that's coming on board. He's nervous about this. Can you sit with him and talk to him about what he needs? And the difference between that is if it's becoming a problematic behavior, meaning like you are now not attending like your kid's birthday because you need to go get a run in, right?
Okay, yeah.
And so we talk a lot about balance and everything.
I feel like you're also figuring out patterns.
100%.
Like you're seeing how their patterns are showing up, and then you can kind of intervene and be like, be aware of this pattern and how can we tweak that a little bit.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah.
And even still, I would much rather see somebody sacrificing some time to go out running than sacrificing out going on that run trying to find the drug.
Yeah.
And so it is a very big difference. And I can earnestly say not one athlete I've ever worked with has gone so far off the rails that like they've become an Olympian, right? Which would be like, all right, that'd be awesome.
Sure.
What I have noticed is that there are a lot that have this behavior where they do a 5K, it's a 3 miles, then 10K, 6 miles, then half, 13, then full. And my goal was only to do 10Ks, right? But my brother-in-law, Jerem, who's an ultra runner, amazing guy, Marissa's brother, he's like, Blu, you can't hold them back though. Because when they're out there doing these bigger races, and we have so many people in recovery make amazing ultra runners and ultra athletes because they get to a place where the pain is.
Yes.
And they've had worse. And I remember talking to one of my athletes, his name was Jeff, years ago. And I'm like, Jeff, I don't get how you can flip and run these mountains. I'm like, I'm puking at the base of them. I can't imagine what you're doing. I'm like, what do you do with the pain? And he's like, Blu, real pain is when the Department of Family Services came into my home and took my kids because my drug addiction was so out of control. And the pain that I felt having a home that was completely quiet, he's like, that hurt. And so when I get arrested and I get set in that jail and they push me in and that metal door slams and the reverberation of that into my heart, he's like, that hurts. So when I'm climbing these mountains, he's like, doesn't even compare. I can deal with that. And the cool thing with EMDR therapy, as you know, is they leave it behind.
Right.
And so there's a lot of times when I'll have them write like, something on their shoe, like self-doubt or, some kind of remorse, something they have. And I'm like, run. And they'll go do their run. They'll come back and it's gone. I'm like, you left it out there, man. And so we do a lot of that metaphoric stuff, but that's, the cross-addicting factor. When it has a therapeutic nature, they're not going to use it as a modality of like self-soothing. They're going to use it as a way to cope. So they're not running away from their problems. They're running towards solutions.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a really great framework for that. Because I've always had personal story, in my process of, recovery from past trauma, even my own addictive patterns and things like that, one of the things that I turned to was CrossFit, which was in the beginning this really amazing thing. We got this cool family of people, but then there was this component of like, I just needed more. I wanted to lift heavier, and then it turned into like, I got to beat this guy. And then it turned into like, I'm hurt, but I don't care. I'm just going to push through it and go do it anyways. And ended up like creating like serious permanent injuries that I'm still coping with today because I wasn't able to listen to my body. And what I've talked about with addiction and cross addiction and things like that, I think the major component from the way that I see it is the numbing component and the compulsory numbing that comes from said thing.
Right.
And so the way I explain it is like, it doesn't matter what it is. You rub your freaking head on the carpet, right? If that's the thing, you can become addicted to that. Whatever. Your dopamine is rewarding some sort of behavior because it got you some sort of numbing thing.
Yeah.
If what I'm doing is compulsory to the point that I have to do it in order to escape my pain, I need to reevaluate. I need to ask myself some really hard questions. Is this doing this? Is it doing what I want it to do? Is this a method of coping that works for me, or is it a method of coping that is in the long term maybe going to hurt me or numb me or create some sort of disconnection from the feeling of being alive?
Yeah.
And I think what running does, and the reason why I loathe it, is because you cannot disconnect from that feeling.
No.
It is right there. Every single boom, step.
Yeah.
It is right there with you.
You're like in the moment.
And you can get the high from it, right? You get that dopamine freaking dump, but after a while, that doesn't carry you.
It doesn't last.
It doesn't last. And so you have to really wrestle with, okay, my heart has to be stronger than my head.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the physical nature of healing.
Right.
And using physicality for healing and hiking and running or lifting or moving or swimming or biking or whatever it is, whatever it is, if you can channel that innate strength that we all have in the heart and let that be the thing that leads you. You do that in the gym, you do that on the road, whatever, that will translate into your life so freaking quickly. And I think this compulsory, cross addiction thing that everybody talks about, I don't know, it gets kind of tiresome.
But see, there's a coach involved with that. And that's why, I'm a therapist, but I love the title coach more than therapist, because there's been times when I've had to like tell my athletes, I'm benching you.
Sure.
You're done. You're not playing now.
Yeah.
I remember that we had a kid that we were playing basketball, and I only let the athletes play in city leagues. There's a lot of sober softball leagues and sober this and sober that. But that still segments them away from the normal path of society. And you guys are not different. You're not unique. So you're going to play in mainstream. And so we're playing softball, we're playing basketball with city leagues. And it was awesome because they inspired those people on the other side of the court. But there's been times when I had an athlete, his name was Josh, who fell to UA. And I'm like, we needed you tonight, but you're coming, but you're on the bench the whole time. Yeah. And it was years ago. And man, we needed him. We lost that game miserably and we needed him. And I sat there in real time and I'm like, because of your choices, we lost this, man. And this is an adult. This isn't like high school, and he just sat there with his, he was in drug court and he sat there with his hands buried on his head, trying to hide from it. I'm like, I need you to watch. And at the end, he graduated drug court and he said that was the hardest thing he'd ever done, was to sit on the bench watching his team lose.
Feel the sting.
And I said,
yes,
that's what's going to happen with your kids when you're on the bench and they're playing, they need their dad. And ever since then, he's been so aware of that. So you have a coach too. It's like throttle down. He's like, I've had athletes that have tried to register for a race every weekend. I'm like, what are you doing? You're not doing that. And they're free agents, right? You call them free agents. You get to choose what you will. And so if you decide to do that, then you're on that team. You got to pick which team you're playing for. And so they'll start, well, fine, I don't need Addict II Athlete. And they don't. They really don't. does really well, gets injured, and it gets in his head. And what happens? Spiral. There's a question that you'd mentioned on the list that you'd sent me about coping with death. We've had athletes that have passed away on this team. And I wasn't ready for that. I was not ready for that. I mean, I remember when I first started keeping track of some of these things, just because of being aware when the opiate epidemic started to peak. In 2014, I'd noticed that, in America, we were losing 144 people every day. Now in 2024, it's up to 301. And that shows very much in real time in Utah, even with our group. And so when we started losing athletes, that was a huge eye opener. And so when I see these behaviors, I'll bench them. I will support other coaches in benching them. And, it's done with care. It's not like the Bobby Knight coaching, throwing chairs on the court. It's taking a knee next to him being like, you're doing too much. We need you here. And so there's a different approach than kind of like that CrossFit where you're like, bigger, better, faster, stronger.
Yeah.
We don't care about that.
It's kind of like, I feel like an approach as like a parent, right?
100%.
We need a parent there to like whoa, like pull you back. It's love.
Yeah.
Like it's love. And you're showing these athletes love that they probably didn't receive from home.
100%.
And they're finally getting it for the first time. And so they're like, also like, this is really hard. But for the first time, they're actually get to think, okay, what are my actions doing to my team?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's such an important lesson to learn.
You're right.
Yeah. So that is really, really
I'll tell
beautiful.
my athletes that. I'll tell them. I'll be like, even on one-on-one with them, I'll be like, really, how dare you build a relationship with us if all you're going to do is take off and go back out? I'm like, then don't do this with us. Because that's the thing, right? When we had one athlete that passed away, and I almost ruined the towel because of this. Her name was Carly. I was working with her at the county. I mean, she was so involved in the team. She started bringing her family, her dad, her mom, her sisters, her uncles, aunts. So this whole family, the rich family, right? They were so big of Addict to Athlete. They were so much ingrained in it. She was over the minor league, which is the 18-year and younger kids. I started noticing that our athletes were bringing their kids to the meeting, which you don't see a lot in 12-step meetings because I'm like, they're not the most emotionally safe place for family systems. But because we're talking about inspiration and leadership and all these other cool things, started bringing their kids. So we started the Addict to Athlete minor league, right? And so all we do is support these little ones. And so she started being a coach and kind of a team captain over the minor league. And, she graduated drug court, stayed on the team for years and years and years, got married, had a kid, started falling into postpartum depression and got in trouble again, got a charge. At that time, I was the owner of my own treatment center. So I'm like, Carly, come up here. I've got you. She comes up. Did so much work up at our facility and did so good. We had a sober living extension, so she moved from our program to sober living. And I remember it was in October. I was talking to her. Funny enough, surely the Lord has a sense of humor. I got called to serve as an LDS bishop. It was kind of a funny thing. I'm like, okay, thank heavens I was a therapist because I'm a convert to the church, so it's kind of a funny thing. And I was talking to her about like some stuff on how to get herself, she wanted to, about some spiritual stuff and she needed a food order for food. And I'm like, okay, I'll be here to do this with you. We can get you set up. It was October 3rd of 2016. It was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays are Addict Athlete meetings. And I told my coach, Jed, he was my sidekick, my right-hand man. I'm like, hey, you take tonight's meeting. I want to spend time with my family tonight. So I got my daughter, Brooklyn, my oldest, and we're going over to buy Halloween decorations and stuff. And I pull into the store parking lot, and I get a call from my supervisor. His name's Davey, and he's like, Blue, are you sitting down? I'm like, yeah, why? He's like, we have a huge problem. I'm like, what is it? And he said, Carly's passed away. And I'm like, shut up. I really did think he was joking. Like, what kind of person jokes about that? And here I am sitting there with my daughter, Brooklyn. She's probably 12, 13 years old at the time. And I'm like, Davey, it's not funny. I mean, this is Carly. And he's like, no, Blue, they're here right now picking her up. And I was like, knowing that my next phone call is going to be to her dad and her mom, who I'm very good friends with, who we've ran together. I mean, the whole reason we've met them is because of her. And so my daughter knows Carly, so she's in real time filling this with me. Oh. I take her home and I drive down to our sober living house and they're pulling her out. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I didn't believe it. I call her mom and dad, same thing. Are you guys sitting down? They were driving down to this thing called Trail Fest, which is an ultra marathon stage race, because Carly got them all involved in running, the whole family. And on my watch, I lost their daughter. And they were beside themselves. She had 2 little kids, 2 babies. They come back up to meet with us. I'm talking to the cops about what happened. They found, the heroin in her room, and the cop comes out and he said, "What's addict to athlete?" And I'm kind of defensive because I'm like, "Don't you dare speak ill." Mm-hmm. And he's like, "I saw she had a shirt in there." And he's like, "Last weekend," which was literally like 2 weeks ago before she passed, we had our annual 5K called the Proxy Run for Recovery Month. And this cop that was investigating ran that race with us. Wow. And he was there. He was at our race in Salem. And he's like, "I am so sorry this happened." Mm. And I'm like, "She was there. You probably ran with her and didn't know it." Her mom and dad come back and, dude, you know how hard that is. I mean, as a business owner, as a, I'm thinking
as a human,
as a coach,
as a human, as a friend,
yeah.
all these things. And we just sat and we just mourned. And the post I had to give to the team, I was done. I told Marissa, I'm like, "This is it. I'm done. If I can't save Carly, what is the point of any of this?" And the next day, I get everything ready. The state comes down and investigates, and everything is kind of falling into place. Her mom and dad asked if I would speak at her funeral. I'm like, "You gotta be, come on." But I did, and the whole team was there, and my gosh, it was rough because these little minor leaguers that know her, I mean,
she was their
they
coach.
loved her. They were, they everything. My gosh, one of my good friends, his name's David Clark. He was an amazing guy. He passed away just after COVID from a surgery that went foul. He told me, he said, "Blu, you're not God. You don't get to dictate who stays and who goes. And to have that kind of complex is way beyond your pay grade." So he said, "Knock the bullshit off and step up. They need a coach right now."
Good man.
It's the only reason this thing kept going was because of what David said to me. Because I'm not. At the end, I have to understand that we're going to have wins and we're going to have losses. That one was rough. And we've lost others. I mean, the opiate epidemic hasn't stopped. Fentanyl is still kind of terrorizing us. Yeah. We're up to 301 people every day in America that passes away. It's like a jumbo jet crashing every day. And the thing that I coach my athletes and people that I come in contact with is like, when a plane crashes, the FAA comes in, finds every piece of that plane, and they put it all together in a big hanger, and they find the exact wire or the nut that's loose, and that's what caused this problem. But right now in America, 301 every day, and we still don't have solutions for it. So I'm like, the troops aren't coming, you guys. You are the troops. So we need you to step up. And Carly gave us all a gift. And I'll wrap it up with this. When I was working with youth, I got we were at some kind of program or something, and the Mothers Against Drunk Driving president was speaking on this rule of thirds. He said 1/3, this is when I first graduated, so I'm like ready to save the world. He said 1/3 of everyone that has an addiction issue or substance use issue, 1/3 will make it. They'll get the help they need, they'll have their aha moment, they'll have the experience, and they will be sober, and they'll live productive, happy lives. The next third will be in and out of jail and in and out of recovery and in and out of treatment for the rest of their lives. They'll have years of clean time with relapses, but that'll be their lot in life. And he said the next third will die, either by accident, by overdose, by illness, but it'll take them. I remember thinking 2/3 of that suck. There's no way that's true. It's very true. And so I look at it as when we lose an athlete because they've taken the ultimate knee, they've also given the other side a gift because they get to be one of the other 2/3, one of them that makes it, or one of them that's still here to fight day in and day out. So we look at, when we lose an athlete, we look at it through those lenses of like that tragedy, can be turned into some kind of motivation to say, we're not going to forget you, but we're also not going to allow that adversary, that foe take us down. And so it's been hard. I mean, we've gone to several funerals of some athletes, but a majority of them they make it. So September recovery month, come down to Spanish Fork, Utah, run our proxy run with us.
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, we should.
It's amazing.
Well, and on a personal note, that whole losing people, like there's this strange responsibility that I think that I'll speak for myself, that I feel for these people who come for help, from us. And losing them sucks, man.
Yeah.
It's horrible. And yeah, it just brought back a flood of all these memories of overdoses and sober livings and cops, and just have been involved in a lot of that crap. So for you, man, like, and you kind of explained this, but what is it that you have found helps the most to give you the strength to continue on in spite of it all? Because we're gonna keep burying these people. Like you said, we're gonna keep losing, but we gotta keep fighting. So what is it that Blu does to help Blu keep fighting?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
It's a great question, brother. I appreciate it. I've asked myself that question many times. I mean, we had a family at Telos, the program you and I worked at together. The Fitzgerald family. Her son Dennis was one of my first Telos guys that passed away. Since then, she's lost her other two sons. She lost all three of her sons to this addiction. And I talk to Joan all the time, and I'm like, how do you wrap your head around this? I talked to another one of my Telos families. Her name's Elizabeth Slater, Charlie Slater's mom. Talk to her all the time. I'm like, how do you do this? And she's like, Blu, we have to live to fight another day. So I've learned to understand that it's my resistance to the what is that causes my suffering. So I don't allow it to happen. I lean into it. So if I'm starting to feel resistance towards something, whether it's talking to someone or advocating or opening my mouth or benching someone, if I'm resisting that and it's causing some heartbreak in me, that means I got to lean into it. There's something there telling me that you've got to address this. Wow. And I do it with my own life. I mean, right now I'm training to run across the state of Utah, dragging a tire for resistance training with a dear friend of mine. Her name's Lisa Smith Bastian. She's a coach and ultra runner guru from Wyoming. And we're going to run the state of Utah for recovery and for sober living funding in September. And I'm scared to death of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying.
We're dragging these stupid resistance tires because it's your resistance to what is that causes your suffering. And so we're all kind of resisting something. But if we lean into it, we can overcome it. And so for me, that same principle applies, And so for me to keep going is just to know that, like, I may not be able to save them all, but hopefully I can influence enough so that they can become the troops, because they're not coming. We are them.
Damn.
That's what we're doing.
Stud, huh?
Yeah. Well, I've never heard that before too. Like you said lean into the resistance, and my stomach just felt a pit. Yeah. I was just like, ugh.
It's the worst.
I need to do that. Oh, damn it. I learned something.
Let's use running as a metaphor. Yeah. When you want to run, what do you got to do? You got to lean over those toes, man.
Yeah. Yep. And it's hard. It's not easy. Resisting, like, there's a reason why we're resisting it, And so, that was deep.
Yeah.
Whew.
Blues man.
Whenever you see someone running in our races, we have this thing we call him Wally, because he's the wall, right? It's a tire you just strap around your waist. Yep. It's funny watching people try to pass him at the end, because no one wants to get beat by the tire. So they always ask, what's this about, right? Well, we're stronger than our past. And everyone loves the comeback, right? Yeah. The underdog story. Everyone loves it. That's what inspires me to keep helping so many people, is when they overcome that, they, again, turn their message to the message. It inspires so many people.
It does.
And the hard part's always in the middle, right? Every story starts off so great. Then there's this really crappy hard part in the middle. Then it finishes strong. That's how it is. So if anyone out there listening is going through a hard time right now, if they're struggling, you're only in the middle. Your story's not over yet. Like, there's times I'll go back and read the ending of a book before I even read it, make sure it's okay. So I'm like, because that hard part sometimes scares us to the point where we stop. But remember, nothing ever comes to stay. It always comes to pass. So just keep leaning into it.
And connect.
Brilliant.
So I have one more question, though.
Oh, yes, please.
Who is Blu?
Oh, yeah.
Your wife knew who she was when you asked her. Yeah, I want to see. Can you answer this now?
Absolutely.
Like, awesome.
I mean, so happy to say that, first and foremost, I'm a husband, and I'm a father, and I'm a scholar, and I'm an athlete, and I'm an artist. And there's so many beautiful attributes that make me me, which is kind of hard because I'm not the kind of guy that likes to get up on a soapbox and talk about that, even though I preach it, but it's true. And every one of those elements has something. I mean, I'm stronger than I think I am. I hope that I'm the person that can motivate, inspire, rather than kind of, remove and distance myself from. I can do really, really hard things, and I'm a failure and I'm a success. There's so many cool attributes to that question.
I love it.
So yeah, Arlen, if you're out there, wherever you are,
yes,
your work, it did sink in. Athletes, I want to thank Matt and the Finding Hope podcast for graciously having me on their show. What a great experience that was. Go give them a listen, give them a follow. They got great inspirational interviews. And as you heard, yeah, they did. They interviewed Brad Waldron, one of our amazing athletes in and of himself. So go check that out too. So on behalf of Team Addict II Athlete, the Finding Hope podcast, go do your best to turn your mess into your message.